teleological and dentological model theories. At this stage, we can conveniently consider the manner in which utilitarianism approaches morals, normative ethical theories are classified as teleological and dentological. These two types of theories differ in how they determine the moral worth of an action, whether an action is morally right or wrong, permissible or impermissible. The teleological approach is also called consequentialism. It determines the moral worth of any action by the consequences or outcomes of that action. An action is good if its consequences are good. An action is wrong if its consequences are bad. Hence, for judging an action morally, we have to consider its actual or likely results. Ethical egoism and utilitarianism are teleological. In contrast to the teleological approach, the deontological approach rejects that the moral worth of any action depends on its sequences. Deontological approach to ethics holds that moral agents have to rigorously fulfill their moral duties or obligations, unmindful of the consequences. Moral agents have to honor human rights and meet moral obligations even at the cost of an optimal outcome. Deontological argues that the moral worth of an action does not depend on its consequences, but that a different criterion should be used. In a later section, we will consider two such theories, Kantism and contractarianism. Utilitarianism as a consequentialism. Utilitarianism involves another question in that it requires a moral agent to foresee the consequences of his action. In any given situation, he has to consider the available alternative courses of action and select that course which will result in the maximum utility or the minimum disutility. But the consequences of acts are difficult to foresee. Let us look at an example which Gordon Graham gives in Eight Theories of Ethics. Historians tell us that the event which triggered the First World War was the assassination of Austrian Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo. Leaving aside the deeper cause of the war, let us assume that the assassination caused the war. The assassins succeeded because of a mistake of the Archduke's driver, who drove up to a dead end and was forced to turn back. As the car halted in order to turn, the assassins got the opportunity of firing at the Archduke. Thus, had the driver not made the fateful error, Ferdinand would have been driven safely home. Of course, this did not happen. We have imagined a historical might have been in the example. We can arrange the momentous consequences of the driver's mistake schematically. Archduke's death, outbreak of the First World War, slaughter of millions, Russian Revolution, Treaty of Versailles, it's the harsh treatment of Germany, dissatisfaction in Germany, rise of Hitler, Holocaust and the Second World War, development of nuclear weapons, dropping of automatic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in taking a wrong turn into the blind alley. The driver appears to have committed the greatest error in history. The example deliberately exaggerates the consequences of the driver's mistake to highlight the problems in tracing the consequences of actions. First, consequences form a series, or an action leads to secondary effects like the ripples which a stone dropped into a pond creates. The first effect leads to a second effect, the second to a third, and so on. This problem, thought difficult, is not intractable. For practical purposes, we have to draw a somewhat arbitrary line when estimating consequences. Normally, the range of consequences for deciding whether an action is good or bad will be short for many actions. Besides the unending chain of consequences, one has to consider the agent's responsibility. In analyzing problems, it is often necessary to separate consequences from responsibility. Ordinarily, people will be disinclined to pin responsibility on the driver in the example of for the cataclysmic consequences. It is unreasonable to say that people have acted badly because of consequences which were not merely unforeseen but unforeseeable. Forecasting consequences of decisions. In studying the consequences, one has to distinguish between expectations and outcomes, or between anticipated and actual consequences. When contemplating any action, we visualize ex ante or beforehand its likely consequences, but actions are assessed ex post facto based on their actual consequences. But while making decisions, we cannot rely on hindsight. How do we then make decisions whether in moral or other contexts? The answer is that we have to rely upon generalizations about cause and effect and follow general rules. We estimate the likely consequences of a proposed course of action on the basis of past experience, and we summarize our experience in useful general rules of conduct. In simple terms, we have to project the likely consequences of an action based on past experiences of similar events. These are embodied in general rules which point to cause and effect relations. Action X is likely to have such and such consequences. For example, we know that driving at a breakneck speed will cause accidents and injure people. Moral agents have to diligently consider the consequences of their actions. For instance, one will be irresponsible in pushing boulders from a hilltop without looking down. As we mentioned before, one has to predict the likely consequences based on experience of similar actions in the past. In uncertain situations, one has to rely on the relative probabilities of different alternative actions. These probabilities can be derived from accurate statistics if available. Otherwise, one has to rely on intuitive sense of probabilities. Utilitarianism casts a responsibility on the moral agent to seek diligently the available information and make informed decisions for maximizing welfare. Anyone making decisions without considering conscientiously the available information will fall short of the moral standards. Thank you.